So let's get into the Gemara. Chevra, yesterday was, it was a heavy piece of Gemara. Hopefully today it's going to, slowly get easier when we get to the Mishnah. It's certainly going to get a little bit easier than what we've been dealing with till now. So, in order to understand the next shtickle Gemara, we need to go back to the Mishnah, because what we're doing is we're quoting from the Mishnah. What did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah said, right, let me just give a little bit of a summary, because some people weren't here for a while. A quick summary of what our Gemara is discussing. The Mishnah basically said that there are certain additional stringencies that the rabbis made with regards to kodesh, which means things that are being brought on the mizbeach, like karbonos. There's a certain stringency that we are going to be extra careful with regards to ritual purity and impurity versus teruma, which, although one has to be careful, it doesn't reach the same level as kodesh. And the Mishnah enumerated 10 or 11 different stringencies with kodesh over truma, okay? And we've been going through the ones that the Mishnah has said, analyzing them and trying to understand them and trying to find the sources for them, how we learn it up. And now we're up to the 10th case in the Mishnah, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, I think we're up to the 10th case. The 10th case that we said in the Mishnah is that you can eat dry foods that are dry, obviously, but your hands are tamei. Okay? We say that is possible to do with truma, but not with kodesh. What's going on? What's going on is like this. We already explained this at length yesterday, but for those who weren't here, there are different degrees of tumah that can spread further depending on what we're talking about. You have avhatuma. That would be like a sheretz. That's an avhatuma. That avhatuma will touch something else or go into the airspace of a vessel, for example. That vessel will become rishon. Rishon can then come into contact with something else, making it a sheni. The sheni that touches something else becomes a shlishi. The thing that comes into contact with the shlishi becomes a revi. The thing that comes into contact with the revi becomes a chamishi. However, we say that when it comes to chulin means non-consecrated food, that we do not go past sheni. It can only become a sheni, and that's it. After sheni, nothing can happen, which means to say that if a rishon, right, which means, let's say this vessel that had a sheretz go into it, comes into contact with, let's argue, a piece of meat. This piece of meat is now what? It's a sheni. This meat that touches anything else, nothing's going to happen to it. Why? Because it's chulin. Okay? Because we're dealing with chulin. Now, what happens if this piece of meat touches a piece of a barrel of, touches wine, let's say, and this wine is truma, so we say that this wine, which is truma, now becomes unfit. It becomes pasul. Pasul means that although it's unfit, it cannot pass on the tuma any further. It itself becomes unfit, and that's it. So that becomes a shlishi, okay? However, by kodesh, it goes all the way to revi'i, which means that if this meat touched this wine, and this wine touched another piece of meat, for example, that would make that last piece of meat unfit for use, because we say that it goes to revi'i by kodesh. So now the Mishnah is saying that you're allowed to eat dry foods when your hands are tamei, which means as follows. The way we're understanding it now is like this, because the Gemara is going to change our understanding. But let's go with the way we understood it in the Mishnah. There is a principle that we learned before, okay, much earlier, back in Daf Yud Ches, if I'm not mistaken, that there's, when things are dry, so let's say an olive, it falls off the tree. This olive which fell off the tree is dry. It cannot contract tuma until it comes into contact with water with any kind of, with one of the 7 liquids, purposely so. In other words, if it rains on this olive that's come off the tree and you're happy about that, you're happy that it was washed by the water, then now from this point on it can contact, it can come into contact with, it can contract tumah. Okay, so what the Mishnah is saying is that if my hands have not been washed, right, which means to say that they are considered to be sheni l'tumah, right? If they're dry, if the food is dry, which means that it has not yet become susceptible to contract tumah, I can take this piece of bread, which is truma, let's say, and I can put it into my mouth and eat it, even though my hands are tameh. Why? Because my hand is not going to pass it on. My hand is not going to pass it on to the bread to make it tameh. So therefore, there's nothing wrong with me consuming this 2 things. Number 1, there's nothing wrong with me touching the truma, because you're not supposed to make something which is truma tameh. It's a prohibition. You're not allowed to make something which is on a level of tahara for truma. You're not allowed to go with your hands and make it tameh. And second of all, you're not supposed to consume something which is tameh. But if my hands are sheni l'tumah, they're tameh, and I pick up a piece of olive, and this olive is not wet, it's dry, I can take it and I can eat it if it's truma. I cannot take it and eat it if I'm going to be using it for kodesh, which means to say my hands cannot touch this olive, even though it's dry, and then use that olive, let's say, for oil on the mizbeach. Can't do that. Okay, that's the way we're understanding the Mishnah as it stands. Everybody understand so far? Good. So now, says the Gemara, the Mishnah said, that we may eat dry foods with contaminated hands in the case of Truma, but not for Kodesh. This is 24b, 2 in the art scroll. It's Chavdal Daven base, about 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 lines from the Mishnah. Okay. Says the Gemara, Tanya was taught in the Brisa. Reb Chanina ben Tignois. Reb Chanina ben Tignois says, "V'chiyesh neguva lekodesh." Is there any advantage to something being dry in the case of kodesh? In other words, the way we're understanding the Gemara right now is as I explained it, that in order for something to contract tumah, it has to first come into contact with liquid, and so the Mishnah seems to be saying that there's a certain stringency with kodesh over truma, in that you're not allowed to touch truma that is what? That is dry, even though you could do that with truma. Okay? So the Gemara is now asking, what kind of stringency is that? We already know that for truma, there's no difference between whether it's dry or not. Why? The esteem that we have for kodesh already prepares them to be susceptible for truma, and so therefore there would be absolutely no difference between whether it was dry or not. In other words, the language of the Mishnah seems to be saying that there's a difference between whether it's dry or not, right? Both in the case of Truma and the case of Kodesh. So we say, in the case of Truma, if your hands are dry, and this thing is dry, then you can consume it. If it's wet, you cannot consume it. But when it comes to Kodesh, whether it's wet or whether it's dry, you can't consume it. But that would only make sense is if there would be a difference between whether it's wet or dry in the case of Kodesh. But we already know that there is no difference whether it's wet or dry, because we already know that these things are susceptible immediately. It doesn't need to come into contact with liquid because they're Kodesh. And because Kodesh is so esteemed, that in itself makes it susceptible to contract Tumah. So therefore, what's the Mishnah coming to teach us? Everybody understand the question? So the So, all right. So the Gemara comes along and tells us as follows: Loi, sricha. We need this going to teach us, for example, shetochav lechaverai letzoich piv. Okay, I'm going to explain this outside and then explain it inside. Okay, buckle up. Here goes. Let's say you've got a piece of meat. This piece of meat, right, is kodesh. This piece of meat is kodesh. Now, your hands are what? Your hands are tamei. Okay, that's what we're saying. Your hands are tamei. This piece of meat is kodesh. Okay. Now, how are you going to get that piece of meat into your mouth? You can't get it into your mouth. Why? Because as soon as your shiny hands touch this piece of meat, that's it. You've ruined it. You can't eat it. So you got a problem. So we're saying one of two things possibly happened. We take this piece of meat, and your friend whose hands are tahar takes it and puts it into your mouth. Your mouth isn't tamei, right? Your mouth isn't tamei. Your mouth is fine. Because when it comes to rabbinic tumah, right, when we say your hands are tamei, it's only your hands that are tamei, right? Not the rest of your body. So your hands are tamei. So you cannot touch this kodesh, but your friends whose hands are tar, they can touch this piece, and they insert that meat into your mouth. Alternatively, you use a particular utensil that cannot contract tumah, and it's with that utensil you put it into your mouth. I don't know, you use a toothpick or something, and without touching the meat, you put that into your mouth. Remember, the toothpick or whatever it is, the stick that you're using to put it into your mouth cannot contract tumah, so therefore it won't pass it on to the kodesh. Okay? So far, so good. We've got the meat into your mouth. Okay. This is where it gets a little bit more complicated. Now, together with the meat of kodesh, what the guy wants to do is he wants to eat a radish or an onion of chulin. Okay? The onion is not chulin. Let's just take a piece of onion, right? Just as an example, because it's easy to work with. I've got a piece of onion. I've already got the meat in my mouth. Now I want to take this onion and I want to eat it, okay, together with the meat. Now, what did we say about chulin? We said with regards to chulin, that chulin, in terms of passing on tumah, it won't go past sheni. A chulin piece of meat doesn't go past sheni, right? So now, even though my tamei hands, right, will not make the chulin food tamei, okay? It's not going to make the chulin food tamei. Tamei means that it can make something else tumah, right? Why? Because it's dry, right? And chulin doesn't go past sheni, as we said. Nevertheless, the Chachamim said you're not allowed to take that onion with your unclean hands and put it into your mouth while you're already eating the kodesh. Why? Because we're concerned that maybe you're going to come to touch either some water or some saliva that's in your mouth. You're going to come into contact with water. What happens when you touch water? We said this yesterday. Water is a unique category in that if you touch it, even with sheni hands, you make it into a rishon. So then what's the rishon going to do, right? The rishon is going to make it possible that now this chulin that comes into contact with the rishon, right? If now this food touches the if his hand touches the onion, right, making it tamei, it is going to then do what? It's going to make the kodesh tamei. It's a really far stretch. Well, it's not really a far stretch. I would say when I was learning this, I was thinking it's somewhat similar to what Rav Shizbi was saying yesterday, that I'm worried about somehow, coming into contact with the kodesh. And because I'm worried about coming into contact with the kodesh, therefore I say, don't do it, right? So here what we're saying is like this. When I'm saying that you can, when your hands are tamei and the food is dry, what I'm saying is not the kodesh food is dry. Not the kodesh food is dry. Because even if the kodesh food is dry, it can become possible by your hands touching it. What I'm worried is that if the meat's already in your mouth and it's fine and it's tahar and it's all good, but if you come along with your dry hands and you touch dry chulin, right, and you want to put that into your mouth, which shouldn't be a problem. It shouldn't be a problem. Nevertheless, I'm worried that you might come to touch some saliva or some water, and then, as a result of that, make the chulin into a sheni, and then make it into not into a rishon, because the water.
Oh no, the water is a rishon.
The water is a rishon. The onion is going to become a sheni, and what it's going to do is one second. For truma, it's going to make the truma puzzle. B, for the kodesh, it's going to make it tamei. Okay? Now, we say that what the Mishnah is trying to tell us is that when we talk about truma, we don't have such a far concern. We're going to say the person is going to be careful that his hand should not come into contact with any water, which would make the onion sheni, which would make the truma shlishi and puzzle. So even though it would be a problem to make the truma shlishi, right? Because if that whole thing that we're worried about actually plays out and happens, that's a problem. But we say we're not going to make a gzeira because we think the person's going to be careful. But there's an extra stringency by Kodesh, and that we say this same scenario, we are concerned that maybe it might happen in the case of Kodesh. Why? Because we're going to be extra careful when it comes to Kodesh. Okay? That is what the Gemara is going to try to tell us in the next few lines. I hope that made sense. Let's do it inside. Okay. He says, yeah. So we need it. Kegoin, for example, in a case where somebody's friend stuck the Kodesh food into your mouth for you. So now, even though your hands are tamei, but it's fine, because you didn't put the meat into, you didn't touch the meat. Your friend put it in your mouth. Alternatively, what happened is, or you yourself, with your impure hand, put it into your mouth by using a toothpick or a stick, which is not mekabel tuma. So therefore, the meat still stays fine, right? And now what you want is you want to eat a radish or an onion of chulin together with it, which, if everything goes well, then it should be fine. But the Kodesh Gazru Barabanan, with regards to Kodesh, the rabbis made a decree that you cannot eat them simultaneously with chulin food, with that's in your tamei hands, even, right? Why? We did that with regards to truma with Kodesh, but truma le Gazru Barabanan. But with regards to truma, the rabbis did not make this concern, right? And that explains to us why the Mishnah used the term dry. Why? Because if the truma were wet, then it's not a chashash, it's an actual problem. If the truma is wet, then there's a real concern. So we're saying if the truma is dry, so therefore we don't have the concern of anything becoming a rishon again, and then coming into contact with the onion, and then coming into contact with the truma, right? So then that's fine. But if the truma were to be wet, then there's a real concern. And since there's a real concern, you wouldn't be allowed to do that. However, with regards to Kodesh, even if it's dry, right, we still worry that maybe some saliva or something else that is considered to be a liquid will enter into the mouth, and as a result, make a rishon, which would make the onion a sheni, which would then make the kodesh tamei. So that's what the Mishnah is coming to teach us. Okay, that's the end of the 10th extra stringency, and now the final one. This is not so complicated. Says the Gemara, ha'oinen or mechusa kipurim. So we say that with regards to an oinen, as somebody who's one of its close relatives passes away, and so during that period of time, he cannot consume kodesh. He's not allowed to consume kodesh. However, he is allowed to consume truma. And the mechusa kippurim, who has the same thing, we were explaining yesterday again what a mechusa kippurim is. A mechusa kippurim is someone who, although he was tamei, he has already undergone the the purification process, he went into a mikvah, and after the mikvah, he waited for sundown. So therefore, he is mostly pure. However, when it comes to eating karbanos, we say he has to wait until he brings his own carbon in the morning before he can have any credit. So we say with regards to both of those, he needs to go into the mikvah for kodesh, but not for truma. Okay, not for truma. Frank the Gemara, my time, and what's the reason that these people have to go into the mikvah again for kodesh? So we say as follows: it's given the ad ha'idna havu asuri, because until this time they were forbidden to eat kodesh, right? Not because they were impure, but because for a technical reason, they cannot do it until something has passed, whether the day or whether bringing their carbon, whatever it might be. Since this period of time has to pass before they can eat kodesh, therefore, the rabbi is required for them to go and undergo an immersion before partaking in kodesh. If you remember the Mishnah that we learned all the way back in Daf Yud Ches, if I'm not mistaken, right, where we said, for example, if a person immerses into the mikvah, but he only had intention for Maisa Sheni or Truma, then that immersion doesn't count for Truma, for Kodesh, because there's this notion that when it comes to awareness and being very careful around Kodesh, right, we say that if for whatever reason you in your mind were not thinking that I need to keep myself distant from even a shlishi, which would make me into a revi, so then we say that we assume that you're not pure enough to be able to consume kodesh. And so therefore we apply that same rule over here, that when you have an oinen, and this oinen or this mechusah kapurim technically is not going to be able to eat kodesh yet, we say that you are not going to be aware enough to keep yourself tahar, to make sure that when it does come time that you are allowed to eat kodesh, that your hands always remained pure. Therefore, we say you got to go into the mikveh again before you consume kodesh. Okay, that is the end of the Gemara. Now we're going to start a new Mishnah. Okay, everybody with me?
Yep.
Okay, here goes. So until now, it seems that Kodesh is winning the day in terms of being very, very, very special and having all these extra stringencies surrounding protecting you from Tuma when it comes to Kodesh over Truma. But here, Truma gets a bit of a comeback, and we have certain stringencies with regards to Truma more than Kodesh. And we're going to look at them, and we're going to analyze why we have made leniencies with kodesh and not with truma. We'll see. Says the Gemara, says the Mishnah as follows: Chayme betruma. The stringencies with regards truma over kodesh are as follows: Shebi Yehuda, in the region of Judah, Nemon in altaris yain v'shemen kol yemei sashana. The Amoret is trusted regarding the wine and the oil throughout the days of the year with regards to Kodesh. But with regards to the season of wine pressing and olive pressing, they are also believed with regards to the purity of the wine and the oil with regards to Truma. So let's just understand this for a minute. We already discussed this earlier, and we said that we were concerned that if we're going to tell somebody, right, that your sacrifice is tameh, the wine that you bring for your sacrifices are tameh, your oil that you bring for your sacrifices are tameh, and therefore we're not going to accept it in the Beis Hamikdash, what's going to happen? They're going to go off and make their own Beis Hamikdash. So we had to accommodate for that, and we had to say, you know what? When a Amoret says the oil and the wine that I'm bringing for the purpose of my sacrifice is tahar, we believe him. Reluctantly, but we believe him. Why do we believe him? Because it's the less of two evils. Because it's better than him going and making his own Beis Hamikdash. And we feel that if we tell him that we're going to believe him, it's the best chance we have in him actually trying to do his part to really be scrupulous and get advice from his neighbor, the chaver, to how to actually make sure that everything is fine. However, we said with regards to Truma, we're not going to believe him. Because if you remember back then in the Gemara, when we discussed this, we said that we're not worried about a guy coming and seeing a chaver immerse his Truma vessel inside another Truma vessel, which might be a problem if the Amaris doesn't do it properly. Why? Because we said if he brings his Truma, we're not going to accept it. So what we see is we're not going to accept the wine and the oil as being tahar from the Amaretz. However, we will accept it during 2 seasons. Which seasons will we accept it? We accept it during the pressing of the wine season and the season of the pressing of the oil season. However, what comes out from all of this is we're more stringent with Truma than we are with Kodesh. Okay? That's what we're trying to say. Fine. Now, the Mishnah continues and says as follows, with regards to the trustworthiness of the Amoretz with Truma. Again, Kodesh, we said we have to accept it because otherwise he'll go make another Beis Hamikdash, right? He'll start doing whatever he wants. So, and there's going to be Ava, there's going to be this enmity. So, but now we're talking about Truma. We say like this, although we said that we do believe him with regards to the wine pressing seasons and the olive pressing season, right? That during that season, we will accept it. He says that it's tahar. When he comes to give it to the Kohen, we'll accept it. And why, by the way, do we accept it? The reason why we accept it, Rashi says later on, right, is because there's an extra consideration, and that is, who are most of the farmers? Most of the farmers are Amaratzim. And if you're going to tell me that we're never going to trust the Amaris with Truma, then all the Kohanim are going to lose out. They'll never get any Truma from anything. Because again, most of the farmers are Amaratzim. Okay? So therefore, that was a further consideration that they had with regards to Truma. But you'll see later on that there are other reasons why at the beginning of this olive pressing season and the wine pressing season, why we're happy to trust the Amoretz. Anyway, however, says the Mishnah of Ragitis V'Abadim, if the wine pressing season and the olive pressing season have passed, and now they, the Amoretz, meaning bring the Kohen, who's the Chaver, a barrel of Truma wine. You shouldn't accept it. Once the season is passed, you shouldn't accept it. So then, what's the solution? What you could do is the Amoretz can take this wine and set it aside, right? Set it aside until the next wine pressing season, and then give it to the Chaver. It makes no sense. Don't ask any questions. That's the halacha. The halacha is, at least this is what the Mishnah is saying over here, that although we should not accept it once the season is passed, but there is a solution that this Amoretz can put it on the side, and when the next season comes, he can bring it to the Chaver Kohen and present it to him during the period of time where we are going to believe all the Amoratzim. Now, but if after the season is passed, the Amoretz said to the Chaver, Hifrashti l'toicha revius kodesh. Oh, now we've got a separate category. If the guy came and the whole season has passed, and he tells the guy, the Chaver Kohen, by the way, in this barrel, I happen to have most of it is Truma, but I added to it a quarter of a loig of Kodesh, right? Then we say the whole barrel is good. Neman, he's trusted. Because what did we say before? We said that we trust we trust the Amoretz with regards to Kodesh a whole year round. So if he came along and says, I have a barrel of Truma, let's say it's a barrel of Truma oil, right? And I have a revius of oil, which is kodesh, which is mixed into this, which I poured on top, right? So then we say is that the whole barrel is now okay, even though it's past the season. Okay, that's what the Mishnah says.
Rabbi,
Yep.
but we learned that when Haaretz tells you it's kosher, you accept it because otherwise you'll say mine is kosher, yours is not kosher.
Correct, but we said earlier that that was only a concern with Kodesh where he doesn't have any recourse. But with Truma, not every Kayan is a Chaver. You can have Kayanim who are also Amaratzim and they're not careful. And so therefore, this guy always has a recourse. He can go and he can say, and he can give it to his friend Amaretz Kayan, and that guy will just not think into it and consume it.
Yeah.
Okay? Now what happens? Again, here's another stringency of Truma over Kodesh. If you have Kadeh Yayin with Kadeh Shemen, you have jugs of wine and jugs of oil. Hamadumois, which are intermixed, which means to say, right, you have everything together. You have Truma, you have Chulin, you have Kodesh, it's all mixed together. So we say, with regards to all of that, Nemanim Aleim B'Shas Hagitos V'Abadim, the Amaretz are trusted regarding the tahara of these vessels during the wine pressing season and the olive pressing season, the Koidem Lagitos Shivim Yom, and prior to the wine pressing season for 70 days. In other words, with regards to Kodesh itself, we trust them a whole year. With regards to just Truma wine or just Truma oil, it's only during the pressing season. But with regards to things which are Meduma, which means they're intermixed, you've got Truma, you've got Chulin, you've got Kodesh all mixed together. So then we say that we trust you up to 70 days prior to the end of this season. Is it prior to the end of the season or prior to the season itself? Right, for the entire season and 70 days prior to the season, right? But not more than 70 days before the season. Why? Because since the contents are going to be used for Kodesh, and we trust the Amaretz with regards to Kodesh, right? During this time. So then in the case of this vessel, which has Truma and not Kodesh, right? The Amaretz is not, if we had a vessel that only had Truma and not Kodesh, we would not believe him to say before the season or after the season that this is tahor, and so this ends up being an extra stringency with regards to Truma over Kodesh. Okay, so far so good.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, Moshe, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, I'm trying to understand are we talking about there are separate jugs of wine and separate jugs of oil that are intermixed together?
Oh, no. We're saying here's the thing. Let's say I have a whole jug of wine. In that wine, I have part of it which belongs to me. Part of it needs to go to Truma. Part of it, I've also decided I'm going to take from this wine and put it on the Mizbeach, right? So now they're all mixed together. I haven't separated them out yet, right? I haven't taken the Truma and given it to the Kohen. I haven't taken the bit of oil that I want to bring with my Mizbeach, and I haven't separated from this jug the wine that I'm going to serve at my own meal, right? So therefore, they're all mixed together. Okay, that's what it means. It's not that there are a bunch of jugs and I don't yet know which, and I forgot which one is which.
How do you separate oil from the wine?
No.
We're talking about either oil or wine, not both.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Right? So
the whole thing is either oil or wine.
Yeah, either oil or wine. So if I have this barrel of wine and I'm going to use part for my dinner, and I'm going to use part to bring to the Beis Hamikdash with my carbon, and I have also the part that I want to give to the Kohen. So we say that up to 70 days prior to the wine pressing season, I'll trust you that it's all tahar in this vessel, right? However, before that 70 days, I'm not going to trust you. And after the pressing period, with regards to truma, I'm not going to trust you. Although with regards to kodesh, I will trust you. Okay,
So,
and that's why
so,
we said, yeah.
so, so if you're going to trust him on Kodesh, and
Yeah.
and it includes everything, and you're telling me, after, let's say on the 71st day before the period itself, he has a jug that has all of this, you're going to say, I will trust you on the Kodesh part, but
No,
even though it's all mixed
I'm not.
together, no?
I'm not going to trust you on the kodesh. You know why I'm not going to trust you on the kodesh? Because it's not yet kodesh. Because you haven't separated it yet.
So I take my jug, I wait until the 70th day, and then at that point I say, okay, now I'm gonna do this, that, and the other. But it was already done before the 70th day. If you
No,
understand what I'm saying.
What we're saying is, yeah, I understand what you're saying. But what we're saying is, if you have this jug sitting there before 70 days, in other words, what I'm saying is like this. There's a whole process. You got to first squeeze the grapes, right, to make the wine, right? And then you're going to put it all into a jug at some point, right? I'm saying it's all going to come out, and it's at the beginning of the season, or 70 days before the beginning of the season, right? Somehow your grapes ripened earlier than everybody else, and so now 70 days before the pressing season, you started to press your grapes, and you got all this wine. So we say, if it's within the 70-day limit that we've given you, and you tell me that part of it you're giving to Kodesh, and part of it is going to go to Truma, and the rest is yours, and it's all in one jug, then I will believe you that the jug is tahar. But if it's prior to that 71 days, right, I'm not going to trust you, because you haven't yet separated it as Kodesh, and it's too far ahead. I don't trust you. Right? In other words, because this is a dispensation, because it is a dispensation that we're making, right? We're making a special leniency. We're telling you we're only going to allow it during the period of time that we make this dispensation for you, because it happens to all be mixed. But prior to that 70th day, we were never comfortable trusting
Rabbi,
you. Yes.
it seems to me that this is a period where there's actually they trust the Amharites because he's trying to make profit at this point, and he wants to make sure it's done right. But anything before it's questionable that he could have maybe taken it aside. Saliva could have gotten it. He could have drank from it, or he could have touched it with tuma. In other words, it's not a period where it's coming out forward where there's a mercantile activity taking place here, and it's to be trusted at that point, at that juncture, because it's like
it's look.
I'm trying to conceptualize it.
No, I think the way I understand it is, since a person will try to do the right thing with regards to Kodesh, if I can honestly believe that your mind is on the Kodesh, right, then I'll believe you. But if it's way too early, and I think that you're going to be too busy, right, thinking about your own wine, right, with which you're not careful, so then I'm not going to trust you that you were careful with this whole jug of oil, this whole jug of wine, right now, when you're drinking it right now, 71 days before you're ever going to bring it up to the Beis Hamikdash, right? I don't think that you're going to be careful for the Kodesh part. Within 70 days, I do believe that you're going to be aware and careful. But in other words, the Am Haaretz isn't walking around every day making sure that they stay tahar. It's an extra incredible effort on their part to make sure they went to the mikvah and they stayed away from everything else, to make sure that this wine that they're setting aside is not going to become tamei. I don't believe you're going to do that 71 days before. And since the wine has not yet been separated for truma, for kodesh, right? It's all mixed in together. So therefore, you tell me that you're going to use it. I don't believe at that point you're being careful enough to make for me to trust you that these vessels are all kosher. 70 days, I make a dispensation and I say, yeah, I'll trust you. But before that 70 days, I'm not going to trust you.
But then isn't what you're saying then contradicts the fact that we say for Kodesh, we accept it for the entire year.
So you're right, but no. Because when it comes to Kodesh itself, and the Kodesh itself, if it has its own designated vessel, so this we could say, if the guy is coming today to pick up his Kodesh wine, right? He made sure to go to the mikvah, and he makes sure that this vessel is kept far away from anybody and no one comes into contact with it. Or he goes and he says, in the morning, I'm going to take this vessel with me to the mikvah. Right? We're both going to the mikvah. Me and my vessel, we're going to the mikvah today. Because why? Because now we're pressing new wine that has not even been susceptible to tumah. Never mind, become tumah. This is what we're going to make today in this vessel that has been immersed with. I myself have immersed myself in the mikvah today, and this special wine is put on the side. That we trust you. But if you're telling me that the wine is mostly going to your dinner, right, 71 days before, and you're not telling me that the wine has been separated. You're telling me it's all mixed together. I don't think that you use that kind of that kind of carefulness and awareness to prepare and to make sure that this whole barrel of wine has not come into contact with tumah. That makes sense?
So as long as there is a dedicated container that's only for Kodesh, that you accept.
That's correct.
But
and that's
if
what we said at the beginning of the Mishnah.
Well, that's what I'm trying to understand, because the way this appeared to be a contradiction. But what you're saying is the Kodesh is a specific bottle that only has Kodesh in it, that you will always accept.
That's correct.
When it's mixed with anything else, then you have these stringencies of 70 days.
That's
to
correct.
worry about. Okay.
That's correct.
All right. Okay.
So that's the Mishnah. I think it's best to stop here rather than to. 1 second. Can we? Yeah. No. You know what? We could do another shtickle. We'll do a bit of the Gemara. Interesting idea. So the Mishnah says that what? The Mishnah said that with regards to the Am Haaretz that lives in the geographical location of Judea, right? They're trusted to keep their sacrificial wine and oil in the state of Tahara. So there's an inference from this. The fact that you say it's the Am Haaretz that lives in Judea is Yehuda in Yehuda, right? In Judea, we do trust them, but over Galil, but the Am Haaretz that lives further north in the Galil is Loi. We don't trust them. Why? What's the difference? Why should I trust the Am Haaretz from Yehuda versus the Am Haaretz for Galil? Is there some difference? Rish Lakish says actually there is a particular thing that we're concerned about, which is why we trust those who are in Judea and not those who are in Galil. What is that? So there's these kutim. These kutim were people who came to Eretz Yisrael. They were brought to Eretz Yisrael, and they were idolaters. Then they converted to Judaism, and then what happened was they went back to the idolatry. And so what happened was they had a strip of land that went across. Okay, so let's say this is Israel, right, going down, up and down. So across the whole thing, there was a strip that was inhabited by the kutim. Now, what was about the kutim? They were Ovdei Avodah Zarah, and what happened is when it comes to their burying of their dead, they would not mark the graves. And since they wouldn't mark the graves, it's possible that a grave could end up being plowed, in which case there's a special chumrah of the Rabbanon that says that you become tamei mid Rabbanon if you cross a field that was plowed that had an unmarked grave in it. And since the kutim were not careful, right? So therefore, anybody that was traveling from Galil, from the north, to were traveling from the north and to the south to Yerushalayim had to cross this, and therefore we're not going to trust that. It's not that we're not going to trust. It's not even possible for the Am Haaretz to bring his wine or his oil from the north to the south for Kodesh. For Truma, yes, but not for Kodesh, right? Well, when I say for Truma, there's a period of time that we allowed it. But I'm saying in terms of what we were saying in the Mishnah, that we trusted in Judea, and that's all we said. We didn't say about anything else. The implication is that we don't trust the Am Haaretz from the north, and the reason is because it's inevitable they're going to have to cross this strip with the kutim, and as a result of that, the whatever it is that you're carrying is going to contract tuma the rabbanan, and you won't be able, and it's going to make it puzzle or even tame in terms of it being able to go onto the mizbeach. Therefore, we never trust it coming from Galil, and we'll
Rabbi,
stop over here.
question.
Yes.
If we're talking about the graves of non-Jews, this is true irrespective.
So it seems, it's a good question. It seems that with the Kutim, we're not sure what their status is. They converted, but they went back. Do we trust them? Do we not? Do they contaminate? Do they not? What exactly is exactly their status? So because of that, if you look at Rashi, I'm not going to go into Rashi now. Perhaps we'll do the Rashi tomorrow because it's a bit of a longer Rashi. I have to explain it. But it seems that we're not sure either we're not sure what the status is, or we are sure what the status is. But nevertheless, because you're bringing something which is kodesh, the rabbis made the stringency to say that no matter what, when you cross this Beis HaPras, when you cross this place, which could have been, you could have a unmarked grave that has been ground up and therefore come into contact with the bone at any place in that strip. So therefore they said we're going to consider everything to be invalid, and that's why we're not going to accept it. But I understand what you're asking, and perhaps I'll look into it a little bit more and come back and address it more in depth tomorrow. Be'ezus Hashem.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Rabbi, I just wanted to follow up on that opening discussion regarding the next Masechta.
Yes.
I don't know if everybody's aware, but ArtScroll recently published in their series on Tosfos, they published the Tosfos with translation in Masechtas Tainus. So if anybody wants to consider that as a helpful source in understanding the Gemara, I just wanted to make mention of that. I'm not sure how well known that is.
So, guys, we have somebody over here that is heavily rooting for Tainus. So, bear that in mind. Okay.
Thanks, thank you, Rabbi.
All right. All the best.
Guten Tag.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Sei gesund.